Good evening. Thank you, Kim. Welcome to Understand and Engage the new Hcpss Equity Policy. We are so pleased to have you with us tonight. I am Tonya Aikens, President and CEO of Howard County Library System and moderator for tonight's event. Please note that this program is being recorded and will be made available for later viewing. As the title suggests, this event has two parts. First, we are going to learn about the policy with Hcpss Board of Education Chair Mavis Ellis and school system staff. And then we're going to hear community members reflect on the policy. This is a complex, important topic, and there are so many important perspectives to be heard. We offer this event as a start and hope it spurs additional conversation. We hope tonight's event helps you take tangible steps to support educational equity in our community. At the end of the event, we're going to ask you to share in the chat your biggest takeaway and any follow-up action you plan to take as a result of tonight's event. We'll also follow up with an email after the event with links and information from our panelists on how to stay involved. Our speakers tonight are wonderful. We also know that there are more people and organizations in our community who are working for educational equity right now. If you would like to share any upcoming events or organizations you know of with us, please email Katie DeSalvo-Thronson at hclibrary.org. I'll ask a member of our team to place Katie's email in the chat later this evening. We'll include information you send in our post-event email to all participants. As we begin this conversation, I'm going to ask that we proceed with a few things in mind. First, let's assume good intent. If you don't understand someone's statement or position, let's assume they are guided in some way by a desire for good outcomes for children and our community. Second, it's okay to disagree. While we may have many similarities, it's okay, and in fact important, to acknowledge our different perspectives. Our views of reality may differ, and more than one reality or perspective can be true at the same time. We'll begin with Board of Education Chair Mavis Ellis, who will open up with some framing thoughts on the policy. Mavis, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is really an exciting evening to be able to share about the new Hcpss equity policy that was just adopted by our board. I believe it was last month or earlier this month. I forget all the dates. So we're talking about policy 1080, educational equity, and we have as its definition, the working definition that we have for the school system is educational equity is a human right and must shape all school system policies, procedures, and practices. Tonight, I will also be joined by Razia Kosi, Facilitator for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Dr. Cherise Hunter, the Howard County Public School System Policy Manager. We can go to the next slide, please. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so prior to 2018, the Maryland Association of Boards of Education, MABE, had an ad hoc committee on equity. And as a member of that committee, we worked to do quite a number of things to frame the issue of equity. First, we adopted equity as a core value for MABE. We created a definition of what we thought equity should really be within school systems. And then we created a plan and had training for school boards across the state. Okay, so from the ad hoc committee, we took our definition to the MABE Board of Directors, and they accepted our definition, which, as you see, the MABE educational equity in Maryland means providing access to essential academic, social, emotional, and economic supports in order to engage each student in rigorous instruction with appropriate educational resources to achieve their highest potential. So, as MABE was focused in on its definition of equity, its training, its impact on all of the school boards across the state, the Maryland State Department of Education had its Network for Excellence and Equity in Education to create a regulation on equity for all of the school boards across the state. So some school boards had their definition on educational equity, their policy on educational equity done much earlier than we did, but the regulations didn't come till a little bit later, which we'll show you in the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, one of the other things that the ad hoc committee on equity did for MABE was to have a definition on what you should look at when you're considering educational equity. So MABE's equity lens included the essential policy, program, and practices to be included in equity work. And we also created an example of equity policy to support school systems. Okay, so you see our questions. Who are the underrepresented groups affected by this policy, program, practice, decision, or action? What are the potential impacts on these groups? This is an important consideration for school boards because we're always looking at policies and programs that impact our students. Does this policy, program, practice, decision, or action worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? Number 3, how have you intentionally involved stakeholders who are also members of the communities affected by this policy, program, practice, decision, or action? And can you validate your assessments in 1 and 2, having considered this stakeholder reaction? Number 4, what are the barriers to more equitable outcomes, mandated, political, emotional, financial, programmatic, or managerial? And finally, how will you A, mitigate the negative impacts, and B, address the barriers identified above? Okay, please go on to the next slide. I think I turned that over to Ms. Kosi, but there's a lot that went into the policy from MABE before it got to the Maryland State Department of Education and wound up in COMAR, which is our state law. Okay, so Ms. Kosi, I'll let you go with it.
Sure, thank you. So what happened then is for the Maryland State Department of Education, we had to come through with some regulations. There used to be something called education that's multicultural. That was a little bit more in the curriculum area, that was more of just kind of basic type of curriculum type things. So when it was up for renewal, we knew we had to do more, and the state superintendent also felt like we needed at that point to repeal that old one, education that's multicultural, and actually write a new regulation for educational equity. And what was also important and different about this is that it was under the state school administration. It actually, in terms of where it fit in the COMAR, it was elevated to a different level that actually had a little bit more weight behind it. And I'm not going to go into the entire COMAR, but just to let you know that this was written with a group that was from the Network for Excellence in Education, Excellence in Equity in Education. And it was with representatives across all districts and LEA's local agencies and schools. So what the purpose was just really to uplift that, provide every student with equitable access to educational rigor, resources, and support. So again, going back to what MABE wanted to make sure that that was there. Want to also maximize social emotional well-being. It's also important to ensure that no obstacles to accessing educational opportunities were there, that those are removed, and achievement gaps are eliminated. So that at the core was really important for us to write a solid policy to put forth, and then the state board also went ahead and voted on that. So you can go to the next slide. So then the next part of this is looking at how MSDE finally adopted the regulation actually a year ago, educational equity. They also went through a couple of drafts to get it exactly where we were, but our work in the county had actually started prior to the adoption because we knew what was coming, we knew what the drafts looked like, and because we're working on the policy kind of parallel, once it was adopted, we were very quickly able to just kind of push forward and get through what we needed to start delivering the drafts of the policy. So March through August 2020 is when we were able to publish it. However, the work did take place earlier in the year just to make sure all the pieces were in place. And we had 2 public hearings, a lot of testimony, which probably a lot of people on here also helped either verbally share their testimony or wrote letters to ensure that we were putting forth the best possible policy to ensure that equity, educational equity is there for all of our students and staff. And then in September now, it's been about a month and a half that we finally adopted the new educational equity policy. Go on to the next one. And just to get a glance over here, you can see that we had a wide variety of community stakeholders on the committee, both in terms of drafting the policy with all the hard work that goes into it, in addition to after the policy was put forth for the board to review and to vote on. We also had a lot of different representation from a lot of community groups to go ahead and share their thoughts about it and their recommendations to make it a more solid policy. So you can just kind of see the vast differences of the groups that were involved.
And Ms. Kosi, if I could just add, CAPA, the Chinese American Parent Association, and Conexiones, and maybe a couple of other groups are not there, but they were on the committee. And just a thank you to all of the residents in the community that may not have been on the committee, but did come to our public hearings and provide ample public testimony because your voice did make a difference.
And we can go on to the next one. Okay, so just a little bit of breakdown to kind of share what's in the policy. So in looking at how our county policies are set up, we have one section that's all standards and a second section that goes into implementation procedures. So the overall makeup, we have like the policy, the purpose statement. We have a section that's academic achievement and growth, and then looking at school climate and culture. So the school environment, and then staff capacity, and then who's responsible and definitions. But what I want to uplift is just these in there. What are some key pieces that were important to put into the policy? So increasing student voice in both academic and achievement and school climate. The first thing that you'll see is student voice. So how do we elevate, how do we amplify student voice? Because this is their, your educational experience, is important to put that. How do we ensure a more inclusive curriculum? Having a racial equity goal, at least one, in when we're writing our policies, some of the plans for the year. Access and opportunity, again, removal of barriers, really framing the school environment with restorative culture and healthy relationships. Workforce diversity, there's another policy that this attaches to along with a plan. Increasing our professional learning and leveraging parent and community partnerships. So those were all really important to put into the standards. You can go to the next one. And then in implementation procedures, we have, when we're implementing, we have to look at funding and allocation of resources, access and opportunity, and diversity, equity, and inclusion supports a lot of where does it fall in terms of making sure the work is done with some grounding and understanding of DEI work, also accounting, accountability, reporting, and how do we address concerns and non-compliance when this isn't happening? Who's monitoring it and where are the definitions? So what was important, again, like big picture wise to put in here, differentiated school funding, ensuring there's supports for mental health and behavioral needs. That's also in the funding and allocation. Annual budget, just promoting equity, where does that come up? multiple input and data points for advanced coursework. So it's student inputs, parent input, looking at different data points, continued analysis, disaggregated analysis of the data, additional professional learning topics, and reporting of our progress, how we're reporting. So again, definitions help fortify all this and who's monitoring and who's looking at the work. These are all the big picture items and implementation procedures. Go on to the next slide.
So what is the next steps for this policy? Well, we are implementing the policy now when it comes for timeline. All staff are being informed about their responsibilities under this policy, and planning is underway. We're definitely maintaining progress on our key areas that we've been working in with regards to equity, such as expanding the culturally responsive curriculum and analyzing data through our school support teams. You may know that the budget process is already underway. So this policy includes utilizing and allocating resources in a manner that promotes the principles of educational equity, planning around increasing our professional learning. As Ms. Kosi mentioned, our workforce diversity and equity diversity policy had passed earlier this year, and there was a requirement for planning in that area. So again, that is in progress, as well as looking at the policy for some additional data requirements that has been added. And so those items are also in progress. Stakeholder involvement. Stakeholder involvement has been key to the development of this policy, and it's key for our continuing growth in educational equity. A key tool for community residents to always be involved is our website. It is the best way to be alerted to new progress, new announcements, Board of Education meetings, and public hearings. There's always testimony time provided to those. You can sign up for that. I provided a link to board docs, which I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with board docs, but board docs is the Board of Education website for posting reports that are published by staff and that are presented at meetings. And it's really a great tool to go back and look at information that's current and from years and years ago. It's all maintained on that website. Also, you should stay involved in local groups. There's many groups that liaise with the school system, and therefore, when they come out and report back to the community through those groups, you are familiar with what's happening. So even in our policy development, we have those stakeholder groups, and someone is representing that group and comes to the policy meetings, and that group influence that liaison who's influencing the policy. So it's very important to be involved in your community groups. And of course, ongoing parent and family involvement is key. Parents can be a part of decision-making teams at schools, such as school improvement teams. You can ask your school staff about racial and equity goals at the school. You can participate in the PTA and assist with equity opportunities that may be available, like providing funding for field trips. So overall, we definitely look forward to continued engagement with and from the community in educational equity. And I think we're going to pause now for the presentation component.
Thank you, Razia and Dr. Hunter. I'll encourage participants to put any questions they may have into the chat. And I've got a couple of follow-up questions now on what's been presented so far. As residents look to stay involved, are there any key dates they should watch for?
So at this moment, there's no specific key dates. Like at the present moment, you know that the policy states in 3 years. So that's years from now, we're going to be reviewing the policy. And the policy also has a strategic planning component. So we don't have dates for that plan yet, but again, stay tuned for that. And finally, we have an advisory committee that's annually going to be observing. So I would say at this moment, we don't have specific dates, but to please stay connected for information as things comes out. Ms. Ellis has something as well.
Yes, what I would say is every January, we start working on the budget. And you may think the budget book is intimidating because it's this big, but you don't have to look through the whole budget to look at the specific sections that are of concern, consideration in terms of how our dollars are being spent for our neediest students. So I would suggest that you look at the budget. And if you don't want to look at the budget, come to a public hearing so that you can share where you think our dollars should be spent. We have several public hearings on the budget, January, February, however, it's going to be online probably, but we have very few people who will come to those meetings to advocate for how we should be spending our money. And let me just tell you, it does make a difference.
Thank you. Are there any similarities, differences from this policy and other educational policies that you'd like residents to be aware of?
Do you mean across counties or?
Across counties and within this school system. If you've had any educational equity policies in the past, how has this differed? And if there are any similarities with others as well.
So this is the very first educational equity policy in our county. So this is as a result of, well, we're moving there anyway, but after the COMAR came out, then we came up with this. So it was the very first. In working with some other counties and seeing some of their policies, I think that ours probably is the most comprehensive that I've seen in terms of the standards and implementation. Since I work often with other counties, they ask to look at different things. And I think ours has been pretty comprehensive into the layers of information that we provide in terms of what we want to uplift, but also how we're going to get there. So I think that ours, in comparison, at least in the versions that they had, some people came out with versions very quickly. Ours took more time because we wanted to do it as comprehensively as we could. So I think in comparison, ours has pretty comprehensive pieces in there.
So what I would say is I'm in total agreement because ours came out after a summer of turmoil where we had a lot of voices to have input into our policy. I do think our policy is more comprehensive. But the other thing that I would like to share is some of you may know that we recently updated our bullying policy to include hate words, hate apparel being worn in schools, being prohibited, but being considered as bullying, because I think that racist names and so forth had not been counted and given the same consequences as bullying behavior. And that is now the case. So people should be aware of that.
Thank you. Participant question, are there plans to reconvene the DEI Advisory Committee?
Yes, not at this time, like not within the next few weeks, that I know of. I can double check with Dr. Gilbert, but yes, we will, because that's an important committee. And for those that don't know, it's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee, and we've been working on different pieces. So one of those was Workforce Diversity Plan, another was a Curriculum Instruction, Anti-Bias Framework with Teaching Tolerance. And so yes, I don't have the details on that, but I'm happy to check in with Dr. Gilbert to see when we will be, but not anytime in the immediate future.
Thank you. Next question here. How will this policy affect the disproportionate negative disciplinary record towards students of color?
I'll just add, there is a requirement to impact it. So let's just start there. The expectation is there. And that's what policy does from the in the policy section is that it sets the standard. So we know we've had that expectation, but now it's set there in the policy. What it does also with the procedures is that it requires that we, as a system, analyze those disproportionalities, disaggregate the data, and plan around, make plans around that. So we have our school teams that pull these data points and look to see, where these things are happening and trying to make that data actionable to make plans around that.
So I would just add to that, school systems have been having this data for many, many, many years. It has been a problem, but what's different with this policy is that the data is to be reported to our community. And that is major. If you have the data and nobody knows what it is, that's one thing. But having the data reported on an annual basis is very important for our school system so we can see where those problems occur.
Thank you. Next participant question. What changes did the board make to the policy that Dr. Martirano originally presented?
The policy went through many drafts, so I don't know if Ms. Kosi can share all of those.
Yeah, so there were a couple of drafts. So I know that, there were many changes. So a lot of them came through with either the testimony or with some of the written things. So I'd have to actually go through this, but there were numerous changes. Is there a specific one that they wanted to know? I know that I think Glenn had that question, and I know some of the community groups like Hoco Collaborative had particular ones that they wanted, Hoco for Equity, like there's different ones that were definitely in there, but we tried to look through to what would really enhance this policy and looking at for the intent of it and to ensure that that was there. So I'd have to go line by line to say how they were changed. So I don't think I can quite do that.
But I can say you could probably point to our definitions. I think we had some key definitions that were not a part of our original proposal that the community, said there's some terms I think that we need to define. Sometimes we feel like people have an understanding of things. We all kind of understand the same thing. But for the policy, we did hone in on a few definitions. I think that was
equity goal, I think was the other one that was put in too. So that was in the front.
Adding the racial equity goal. Yep. That was another one.
Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of funding for this policy, will it have an individualized budget line for its funding? Will it be embedded in each program of the budget book of the school system? If the latter, could the community have access of a detailed equity budget from this point forward?
So, Ms. Ellis, do you want to go to the budget, or you want Ms. Hunter? I can read the line that it says. But
Okay, read what it says and we'll go from there.
Why don't you take a second to find it, and if you want to answer one other question, I'll come back to them.
I know a good portion of that line is that we will be allocating our resources in an equitable manner, or promoting the principles of equity, and that each program page will include equity information. So there's no line for equity in our budget. Our budget is established to promote the principles of equity. We will be analyzing our budget better to see how we're doing in that area, but there's no line for equity. Like we want to present that throughout our budget, so that I know that's a priority for the school system.
So I can read exactly how it's worded. The superintendent designee will propose an annual budget that allocates resources in a manner that promotes the principles of educational equity. The equity information will be a part of each program budget where applicable, and include an analysis of resources that address disparities in educational outcomes.
Okay, so you see that's a very tricky question. I don't know that it's been fully answered by this policy. It will be more fully answered through the implementation of the policy. And that's where the community is sort of the watchdog group to see if, where this money is being allocated. We didn't vote as a board to define something as having a line item budget for equity, but it was a major concern of some of our board members that we had exactly that. So we sort of got part of what we wanted, but not all of what we wanted. So you will have to watch the budget to see if in fact you can tell from looking at the information that's being provided if we're looking at equity across the board.
Thank you. Are you hiring additional staff or consultants to implement the policy?
We're not hiring to implement the policy, but 2 more staff have been hired in our office. And so one is the coordinator for restorative justice and the other is coordinator for school climate and culture. Because the implementation of the policy doesn't only fall within our office, it's across the entire school system.
Could you, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Razia. Could you give a few examples of how this might actually show up in students' lives, this policy?
Sure. So some of the things, especially when we're looking at access and opportunity, we're always looking for other on-ramps for students to be able to take courses that are more advanced, like looking for the ways that we can help do that. So it's not just one opportunity, there's multiple on-ramps to do that. And it's also dynamic coursework. It's not just more homework and more, it's like dynamic. It takes them into consideration, what ignites them, what excites them, and helps them kind of look at this. It's also like seeing themselves in the curriculum, in the stories, in the materials that are shared, uplifting their voices as well. So these are ways day to day. The other thing is really in the school climate and culture. If you look in that section, it's really looking at putting relationships at the key and looking at how do we build, looking at all of the child and their emotional well-being, and not just, a person who just gets a certain grade or a score. So that's really at the core, nurturing the healthy relationships with students, with staff, and community, so that it's always looking at being student-centered. So those are some day-to-day pieces. Incorporating student voice in the school and district level decision-making. So making sure students have more opportunity to be in decision-making meetings, or having that voice in the school itself as well as system-wide. So those are some day-to-day ways that we're looking at that. Some of the professional learning really looks at bias, implicit and explicit, and that's already been taking place, but we're amplifying that more. And also, that this continues beyond right now, when there's such a targeted focus, that this has to be a policy that is living for the next multiple years, decades, so that we really are changing some of the things that have been historically taking place, not just in our county, but across the nation. So we really are working to change all this with educational equity policy, but it does mean that it is ongoing, very focused, targeted work.
Thank you. What will Hcpss do to set and get input on its annual Achievable equity goals?
That's a great question. I'm definitely excited about that requirement of the policy. And that is something that, again, like I said, we're in the planning stage, stages 4. So we are determining just that, the expectation is set, and we're in the process of meeting to create those processes, because this is new. It's something that we haven't done before, but I think it's a very exciting element to undertake.
Thank you. How will test scores be handled, for example, if a student doesn't test into a middle school program?
Middle school program meaning like an advanced level program? Am I understanding the question correctly?
I'm going to assume from the participants.
Okay, Rebecca said yes. Yeah, so that's why we're looking at multiple data points. So you have certain things like test scores, but you're also looking at, you know, what else are you looking at? Are you looking at there's other things besides the test scores, and I'm blanking because I'm focused more into this area. But when we're looking at some of their grades, some of their writing samples, some of the other pieces, those are all important to look at, not just and one piece of data. And also, what does the child believe they can do, and what do they want to do? What are the parents also advocating for? So there's also multiple ways to look at that. So it's not only one opportunity you didn't test in, so to speak, or the score was high, but then you didn't show, they said, well, maybe, but they talk a lot in class. Well, that shouldn't matter. That doesn't matter, right? That isn't an issue. So can they do it? Are they willing to do it? And once they're there, how are we ensuring that they are welcomed in that classroom, they have the supports they need, and that they're given every opportunity to attain their goals of wanting to be there and continuing further.
Thank you. Let's see. Currently, students are placed in GT Math by test score only for elementary school. How will this change going forward?
That's an excellent question. And if we had a curriculum specialist on the panel, I think that I would defer to them. So I know that those are other questions that we'll have some solid answers to.
Thank you. Let's see, how will principals and administrators at individual schools be held accountable for sharing data connected to this new equity policy with parents, families, and other stakeholders connected to their schools in an open and transparent way?
I mean, at the basic level, all staff are accountable for, you know, following our policy. Again, back to that plan, I think that as we're laying out all of our goals and we're checking back into how we're doing on their goals, we kind of have that a very detailed check involved. We're going to be providing our reports to the board. Much of that will be also kind of a check for us as we provide those reports. And again, those are publicly available reports. So I think we kind of have this loop set up. The policy is not going to let us not, you know, get something done. We kind of have a good structure in the policy with the required accountability plan, with the required reports that are detailed. I think we'll get those things done.
So I see a question about, can you provide a name to follow up on the GT Math question? And what I would suggest is if you don't get your question answered here, you can always send an email to boe@hcpss.org. If you send that email, your question will be routed to the person who has the expertise in order to be able to answer your question. So although we aren't experts on everything, if you send an email, you can get an answer to your question. I see it all the time. We know that it gets to the right staff, and then everybody's happy.
Thank you for that. There was a part B to an earlier question. Make sure we touched on it. How is the Board of Education and HCPSS maintain transparency in future EE data sharing and implementation plan rollouts?
Okay, I may lose you guys. I'm gone again. My computer's not working well tonight.
We can hear you.
Okay. Everybody was frozen for a minute. I'm sorry, repeat your question, please.
Yes, absolutely. How is the Board of Education and HCPSS maintaining transparency in future EE data sharing and implementation plan rollouts?
There will be annual reports they're not more the implementation rollouts that you're talking about are new to us as they are to you, especially as we're in this COVID environment. Things aren't the way that we would hope they would be. So many things are being created in an ongoing fashion. So I'm sure that the board, as well as the whole school system, will continue to be as transparent about these things as we possibly can.
Thank you. And it looks like last one here is what makes you motivated and hopeful about the plan?
Okay, so what makes me hopeful about the plan is not only do we have a plan, but today at the MABE legislative meeting, their first legislative priority was on equity and excellence in an uncompromising, committed way for all of our students. That's number one. As we get ready to look at the second thing that's impacting all of us across the state is COVID-19 and the impact on equity and all of our students. So that we have a plan, that we've identified some goals that we will be getting reporting, that makes me hopeful that we'll be able to work through this very difficult period.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Ellis, Dr. Cherise Hunter, and Razia Kosi. We're now going to shift to the second half of this event, which is engaging with the policy. We have a wonderful panel here tonight, and I will introduce them now. Prince Achoronye, a leader in Hoco For Justice, a recent graduate from Long Reach High School and current student at Towson University. Dawnette Banks, PhD with Equity for HC. Dawnette studies and consults on issues of educational equity. Amy Brooks, co-founder of Oakland Mills Online, an English teacher at Oakland Mills High School, and a parent of 3 Howard County students. David Koralov is a current student at Centennial High School. He is part of the Howard County Racial Equity Taskforce and the Howard Progressive Project. And Tracy Williams, first vice president of the African American Community Roundtable. Tracy has been a pupil personnel worker in our school system for 20 years. Welcome. We cannot wait to hear from you. I'm going to ask you to please repeat the organizations you work with as you answer this first question. And I'll start in the same order I introduced you. So we'll begin with you, Prince. Why is equity in education important to our community?
Hi, my name is Prince. I'm with Hoco For Justice. One of the biggest things that growing up in Howard County that I experienced was that a lot of people that I was associated with and that I was friends with didn't have the same opportunities that other people had just due to their financial issues with their family, and also just where they were at in our society at that time. And I just believe equity is important. Not even just in our school system, but any school system, based on the fact that everybody deserves an equal chance at getting to where they want to be in their future, whether it be academically, career-wise, or anything in between. Just equal access to resources and everything of the sort to put them on the right path to getting our kids of the future to the right destination. Just speaking from experience, I know, even though I didn't suffer just like as deeply as other people did, that I saw, like that I witnessed with my own eyes, I still know that if that sense of equity was really, strengthened and elaborated on in our education system at the time, I definitely would be at a better area in my life. Not to say that where I'm at isn't good, but I genuinely feel that it's something essential that we need to implement in not just our school system, but all school systems around the country. Just as I said before, to provide the means to getting our kids of today and of the future to where they need to be.
Thank you. Dr. Banks, same question. Why is equity in education important to our community?
Good evening. Educational equity, it brings voice to the experiences of our county's most susceptible students and families who have for generations endured the trauma of systemic educational disparities stemming from institutional and systemic racism. So in short, the educational opportunity of our neediest children is in a state of emergency. There are also tremendous outcomes impacting this nation's economy. For instance, according to a report released in 2018 by the Kellogg Foundation entitled The Business Case for Racial Equity, researchers indicated that by 2050, our country stands to realize an $8 trillion gain in GDP by closing the US racial equity gap. This has profound implications, as the study also reveals that closing the achievement gap is potentially the most beneficial strategy for producing economic, human, and social gains, not just here in Howard County, but across the US. Researchers estimate that if the educational achievement of Black and Hispanic Latino children in the US was raised to that of white children born in the US, the economy would be $2.3 trillion larger by 2050. In addition, educational equity is extremely significant to our community because it is a basic human right, and all students, including those from marginalized backgrounds, are deserving of being positioned so that they can thrive with dignity, purpose, and power.
Thank you, Dr. Banks. David, same question. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy. I'm sorry to skip over you, Amy. I apologize. Amy, thank you so much. Why is equity in education important to our community?
Good question. I'm an OMO founder, so we started Oakland Mills Online because we wanted to offer opportunities for people who maybe couldn't afford private tutors or engaging activities while we were quarantined. And then I am also 20+ year educator in Baltimore City and now Howard County at Oakland Mills High School. And I know every day when I work with students in my class that have English language learning classifications, or they're in a special ed program. I also have students who are in alternative ed. I can see how important it is to recognize their zone of genius and to really give them the supports they need to show their excellence every day, because we all have the capacity to do that. And as the mom of 3 sons, I know that they are very different and they need different levels of supports. So in these 3 roles, in nonprofit, as a public servant, as a teacher, and as a tax-paying community member and parent of some Oakland Mills students myself, I recognize that equity is important in schools because this might be the one time that Americans experience people truly supporting them in the way they need to be supported so that they can achieve. That's not really how society's built. This is our one chance to help students understand how to best access learning, and to give them as many tools for their toolbox now is critical, because once they graduate, we're all kind of left to our own devices to figure out what to do next. So I like to think of it, we either recognize that all students can, or we think they're inferior and are failures. And so I reject that second characterization. I think all students can, and if they're not currently succeeding, I think it's our fault. As an institution, as adults, as paid employees and community members, if we have students who are failing, that means that we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing to make the learning environment accessible. So that's why it's important in our school system.
Thank you, Amy. David, why is equity in education important to our community?
All right. So my name is David Koralov. I am I'm a 12th grader at Centennial High School, and I'm on the Howard County Racial Equity Task Force, and I'm on the board of directors of the Howard Progressive Project. So before I get started answering the question or answering the questions, I'd like to provide a tiny bit of context. So over the last couple of years, I witnessed several teachers continuously make outrageously racist and discriminatory comments towards students. These ranged from so-called jokes, such as "all women do is eat," as my chemistry teacher said, or "you can never trust a brown boy," as my government teacher said, to statements such as "those people in Baltimore are all so lazy." There were also more subtle but not less harmful things, like when my statistics teacher insisted that there is no workplace discrimination against women while discussing a valid mathematical example, but using data he made up himself. I often objected to the teachers involved and eventually brought up the issue to the school administration. The principal was unwilling to openly state, much less publicly acknowledge, that any teachers did or said anything wrong. To answer the first question, namely, why do we need educational equity, I'd like to stress that racism is not just a theoretical threat, but a very real aspect of the daily lives of my fellow students, of many of my fellow students. I've only brought up one aspect of racism, namely the inappropriate comments by teachers and administrators, which may not seem as directly harmful as biased placement in advanced courses, unfair disciplinary practices, and so on. But it creates an atmosphere that makes other types of discrimination possible.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Williams. I'm with the African American Community Roundtable. Educational equity is important to our community because it gives all children the opportunity to reach their potential to be successful. Students who are successful academically have the opportunity to achieve financial independence, become good citizens, and contribute to our communities. They also have the ability to contribute to our community's economic system. Students who are not successful academically must rely on the community for support through social services or other activities that help them provide for their basic needs. Educational equity increases the chances of our community having more successful citizens in the future. And if I might give you an example of a situation many years ago, as a pupil personnel worker, I encountered a family, an African-American family who had moved to Columbia, and they really didn't have a place to stay yet. They were staying in a hotel, and the mother of the two children had an interview which was close to a school in Columbia. And so I had to make a determination of whether or not, where to register those two children. When I registered those two children, the principal was very upset with me and was asking, why did you choose my school? And they were registered as homeless students. And I think that because when we hear the word homeless, we automatically assume that a child has some type of deficit, that a family has a deficit. But this was a mom who had moved to this area for a job, and she was trying to get away from a bad situation, a bad relationship. And when those two children went to that school, they turned out to be academically advanced. They were placed in gifted and talented programming, and they made this test scores in that school look really great. And that principal came back to me and said, you know, I really have to apologize to you because those students were outstanding students. And I made a decision and got upset because I was basing it on something that, you know, I assumed or thought because they were homeless, that they were poor and that they were not academically on grade level. So that just gives you an idea of why, you know, why educational equity is so important. We have to believe that all young people have the capacity to learn and to achieve. And the only way we can do that is to promote educational equity.
Thank you. Prince, before we get to this second question, I'm hoping you can share more about your experience to help us talk about equity. What kinds of opportunities would have helped you advance your future more?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yes. So I'm hoping you can share more about your experience to help us talk about equity. What kinds of opportunities would have helped you advance your future more?
Well, the first thing is just access to resources. Just as I can relate with many people, just, growing up where you're not, you're living the best financially. Of course, you're going to have limited resource when it comes to schooling and everything of the sorts, and even extracurriculars and stuff. I feel like in order to reach your full potential as a student, you should be able to have access to the resources that you need so you can educate yourself in all the areas that you need to in order to fully understand what you need, who you want to be as a person in the future, the different career paths that you want to choose, or even just in the moment, in the present, just trying to perform well academically. As a student back when I was in the Howard County school system, even though I did succeed in just, making my way through the academics of the school system, it still was difficult just because I wasn't fortunate enough to have the resources that that most people do. As like, they're well off, and some people aren't. Transportation to extracurriculars or access to technology and books and different events and such like that. It becomes difficult when you're not fortunate, when you don't have the same access that people who are fortunate enough to do. And I just feel like that's one of the biggest things that raises the it sets that equal access for people to benefit themselves the way that they need to when it comes to education.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to toss back over to you, Amy, if I can for a minute. Can you share some specific examples of equity you see as needed for your students, Amy?
Yes. So there are a few things actually that has come up since we've been in quarantine. For example, we've had lunch programs or meal programs through select schools. And we heard pretty quickly, like I heard from my students, that they couldn't walk 2 miles round trip to pick these things up due to family illness or babysitting, or a lot of my students, their parents are working and they'll be at home. So we started working with another community organization through OMO and me as a teacher to get meals delivered. And so we'd wish that Howard County had done that because it was clearly a need that people couldn't necessarily walk and carry these really heavy bags. Recently, we've noticed that students are unmuting themselves during their classes and it's very noisy. I can hear other teachers talking because in one case, my student has 6 siblings and they're all in a close area and she'll often be holding her baby sister because adults are working. And I can hear the kindergarten teacher and the 4th grade teacher. So we gather donations to get headphones and those sorts of things. I wish were available for our students. At our school at Oakland Mills, we have $110 million in deferred maintenance, for our HVAC system, which doesn't feel as equitable, to have clean air, especially now, as maybe some of the other schools. And we are not on the capital improvement plan. And we have 80% non-white students, so a mix of Black, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, and then mixed students, 80%, but 80% of our staff is white. So, hiring and retaining, that retention is really important in Howard County. And I hear a lot of times that there just aren't people applying. So I think maybe we need to, with this new policy, to be more proactive in reaching out to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. I graduated from Towson. We had a very robust education program and amazing teachers to really, as Razia was talking about earlier, have students see themselves not only in their literature, their textbooks, but also in the leadership in the classroom. And yeah, I think that textbook committees are important, and parents need to know that they can be on those community members. You guys can help decide what books we get to teach, and then ultimately the school board is going to decide what they're going to fund. So having approved texts doesn't mean much if we can't afford to buy them and give them to our students. And lastly, I just think there needs to be a lot of equity in terms of our students getting in trouble. You know, if they're punished for missing school because they work all night. I have students who clean offices all night, or they work 5 to 7 days a week. That makes it harder for me to support them because I have really rigid rules around how I assess them or timeframes. So to have more comprehensive supports for students who are juggling a lot, I think is really important. That means we should be listening to their voices when they're concerned about SROs, course remediation. I've had kids take English 10 3 times and they're 20. You know, like, what could we do to support our students instead of making them sit through a course for a whole nother year? It didn't work the first time. It didn't work the second time. They end up dropping out. And we have record high numbers of that happening already this year. I really would love to see no more out of school suspensions, because that takes my kids away from me. I want them in the building so I can go and I can teach them, even if they're separated in another room. I can check in on them. I can make sure they have all their materials. I'm so excited about the moves we're making with restorative justice in Howard County. I think all of these things support our best nature, our students as whole humans, and it's just really, I hope those are specific enough, the really everyday ways that we can make people want to thrive, want to come to school.
Thank you for that. Dr. Banks, I've heard that you're an aunt of Howard County students whose mother has had to advocate to get her kids into advanced classes. Can you talk a little bit about their experiences and the importance of teacher expectations?
Absolutely. I do have a sister who is a parent to a rising 5th and 7th grader here in Howard County. And she actually is also an attorney here in the area. And just listening to her, her plight with trying to ensure that her children are able to have access to advanced rigor in coursework. Her story basically is that both of her children were tested for the gifted program. However, they did not test into the program. So she ended up opting to go through an appeals process. And just her sharing with me about all of the obstacles of navigating the appeals process alone. And she's an attorney, so just imagine, you know, if someone who may not have had that same, and I'm a very engaged parent, by the way, as well. So someone who may not have had the same social or political capital that she actually possesses, they would have definitely not been successful in going through this, the appeals process. However, her youngest, the 5th grader, he actually, through the appeals process, he was actually granted access into the gifted program. And then her 7th grader, the middle school, my niece, she actually did not, the appeal was denied for her, but my sister made the option to place her in a gifted, the gifted GT math in middle school. And so both of them right now, if she had not gone through the appeals process, both of them now have A averages in their GT programs. And so this just speaks to the gatekeeping mechanisms that that have been put in place, particularly in elementary schools, because research shows that students that are not placed in GT math and earlier, or GT advanced courses in earlier grades, most likely their trajectory is not going to be eligible, or either to be able to have the ability to perform in those advanced courseworks in middle and high school. So one of the things that we're really excited about with this policy is that we're looking at giving parents an opportunity, parents and students, an opportunity to weigh in on the decision to be able to have access to advanced coursework and academic rigor.
Thank you. And that's a great segue into our next question. And Tracy, I'll start with you. What in this policy do you think is most important or essential?
Wow. Well, I think one of the most important things is the fact that it is a comprehensive policy. It includes professional development training, which is key to changing the behaviors that support structural racism. The policy also includes or engages community stakeholders in giving their opinions, and also provides the public with data about the different demographic groups and what's going on as far as suspensions are concerned, and expulsions, and those types of things, and the achievement gaps. The policy also, and of course that's providing more transparency and accountability. The policy also speaks to the hiring of a more diverse staff, so that the staff looks like the students. And it also talks about the curriculum being developed so that it tells the experiences of people of color, and it doesn't leave out what they went through. And it's just more comprehensive and more inclusive overall. And finally, I think one of the most important things, I guess I might choose this as one of the most important things, is that it speaks to the importance of promoting a good school climate and culture for our students, and students who develop relationships, students and parents who develop relationships with staff members. It helps to it impacts their sense of belonging in schools. You know, it's so important for children to feel like they belong in a school, and that this school is a part of who they are, and that they have the ability to achieve, and that their opinions matter. And that's what helps young people be successful. And that starts as soon as a family walks in the door for registration. That secretary that they meet, you know, sets the stage for what the other experiences that they will have in a school system. If that secretary is warm and engaging, and then they walk down the hall and they meet the principal, or they meet a teacher or someone who says, "Good morning, welcome to our school," and then they go into the classroom and they can have a relationship with a teacher who, you know, is supportive of them, who believes in them and says positive things, sets high expectations for them. That is what a good school climate is, that sets the stage for a child to feel like they belong and that they can achieve.
Absolutely, thank you. David, same question. What do you think is most important or essential in the policy?
All right, so policy 1080 promises to gather data on racial and gender disparities in some aspects of the school climate, such as arrests, disciplinary measures, suspensions, expulsions, and so on, which is, of course, important, but it is not specific about other inappropriate behavior by staff. One possible way to extend the policy would be to create a public database containing all allegations and findings of discrimination.
Thank you, David. Amy, same question. What's most important in the policy or essential for you?
I think just let's see, am I unmuted? Yeah, I think just having really explicit conversations. So often we can have what was termed white solidarity. There are a lot of white people who kind of maintain power, who promote students who look like them in spaces that are advanced. And, you know, we talked about that earlier. Dr. Banks had touched on it too. And so having explicit, uncomfortable conversations for white educators in particular is really important. And what I'm hoping for is that this policy is going to take things out of very safe, sanitized, and secure settings like we're in today, with, you know, time limits and rules and protections and order and mute buttons, and make it part of everyday conversations where somebody says, oh, I don't think they're GT level. And having our peers say, why not? What do you mean by that? And really kind of teasing out some of the unintentional bias that we all carry, even if we're not intending to diminish the zone of genius that I mentioned earlier. If we aren't in a space where we can explicitly talk about it, and I think this is encouraging us at every level of Howard County Public Schools to talk about it all the time, then we're going to perpetuate the status quo. And what I think I'm hearing now from Maryland, from our Board of Ed, like this whole conversation now, the library system, is the status quo isn't good enough. It's not serving us, and we'd be better if we moved away from what we've been doing and tried something different, even if it does make us uncomfortable. And over time, we'll be very comfortable recognizing where we make mistakes, calling out our teachers, as David said, having those call out moments serve as an educational tool where teachers can learn and grow with our students.
Thank you. Dr. Banks, same question. You talked a little bit before, but any other things that you find most important or essential in this policy?
Yes, I wanted to add in reference to the GT placement, being able to have multiple data points as well to assess a young person's ability to actually succeed in a GT program. Also, one of the most important, I believe, essential parts of this policy is equitable learning outcomes. I think that's the main goal here, is to alleviate those the educational disparities that we've seen throughout the generations, and also being very, very strategic and intentional about really removing and dismantling the institutional barriers that obstruct access and opportunity to high quality education for all children. And so the implication of this policy also is to make sure that we don't have a toothless tiger in this policy. And so the teeth here being the resources that are necessary to ensure those equitable outcomes, as well as how those resources are used. And we can just look at, even in terms of the pandemic, you know, people have sort of, you know, our parents, you know, have been, you know, very vocal about how their students, you know, or their children are really missing their teachers. And so we've learned, even in that case, how the use of resources is just as important as the resources themselves. And even as we've seen disparities within the context of COVID-19, we want to just make sure that resources are in place that will provide more of an equitable outcomes. Outcomes is like the ultimate goal here. And so I believe the policy really, the most important piece of it is going to be able to make sure that we're realizing those equitable outcomes. And of course, that's going to also lend itself to making sure that we're doing the proper tracking and looking at the disaggregated data so that we can make sure that we're seeing those gains and those learning gains and the achievement gap being narrowed.
Thank you. And Prince, what in the policy do you think is most important or essential?
As I've been highlighting before, just access to resources, just for those who are marginalized, just because it will help decrease that gap between those who are privileged enough to get who have access to those resources and those who do not. Another part of the policy that I think is really important is just the hiring of more people who look like the students as it is worded in the policy, having more role models in that area that are of Latinx descent, or African American descent, or so on and so on, just because it provides a lot of students who are of that descent to have just people that they can look up to and just learn more about themselves through people who they see as role models, or people who they can see as a mentor of the sorts, just because I feel like that is something that'll also help in the aid of reaching that sense of equity within our county.
Thank you, Prince. And I'm going to stay with you for our last question here for the panel. Prince, this last question: how can people in our county support educational equity over time, whether through supporting this policy or through other means?
Well, it all just comes down to just educating yourself on the policy itself. Just know what it says, know different ways to amplify it and also strengthen it. Talk to different executives, attend like the town hall meetings. Also, if you are a parent watching this, ask your child their experiences within the school system, and also see how you can use your voice and talk to other officials in the higher ups to help reach that sense of equity within our county, because at the end of the day, this is all for the children of the county, and they are the future, and doing our best to see that everybody's as equal access to resources in order to make sure that that future is bright. That's just the end goal. So just educating yourself on the policy, joining or participating in different organizations who advocate for the policy, and also amplify the voice for change, such as the organization that I'm a part of, Hoco For Justice. But there are many other organizations out there that advocate for this policy and other policies related to this. And I just advise in just educating yourself on those different policies, and keeping yourself in that circle of communicating to the higher ups in the county.
Thank you. Dr. Banks, same question. How can people in our county support educational equity over time?
Yes, absolutely. So I think one of the main ways is that we have to use our collective genius to organize, to do a lot of community organizing, and particularly keeping our ears to the ground concerning the implementation of Policy 1080, staying updated on the Howard County Board of Education agenda items and meetings. I know when we were actually started working on this policy, it wasn't even on our radar. My sister actually, who is very engaged, she actually brought it to the attention of our team, and that's how we actually got information about it. So and being plugged in to what's happening in the Board of Education, that's going to be very key to making sure we're updated. Also organizing additional forums, just like today, for stakeholders to learn about Policy 1080, partnering with PTAs to engage parents in Policy 1080 updates, monitoring and reporting issues of equity in our spheres of influence, raising our expectations of all children, supporting and formulating coherent and meaningful partnerships that promote Policy 1080 and its implementation, telling everyone we know about Policy 1080 via word of mouth or social media platforms, organizing a Policy 1080 community campaign with public and private organization partnerships and sponsorships, organizing formal and informal parent academies for information sharing, formulating partnerships with HBCU colleges of education to promote a diverse teaching workforce, utilizing research to inform the implementation of Policy 1080, partnering with and strengthening the work of racial and educational equity organizations, communicating virtual learning space challenges for your child or children you know, educating ourselves by reading books and articles on racial equity and educational disparities, donating or volunteering for food distribution programs in Howard County. And as we know, physiology actually has a direct impact on cognitive function. So that's very important. Also securing long-term financial resources from businesses to support the implementation of Policy 1080, because we know that this policy is going to be driven by resources.
Thank you. Amy, same question. How can people in our county support educational equity over time?
Well, I mean, Prince and Dr. Banks just said so many of the wonderful things that I was thinking about. I'm going to amplify Hoco for Justice and really centering student voice. And we have Oakland Mills United and so many different student organizations and in this area. I also think just organizations in general bring you together and energize you about a particular topic. So, you know, if you want to, we didn't talk anything about our LGBTQIA+ community. CARRY is an amazing organization that is doing so much advocacy with teachers and parents, and to align yourself in these different spaces is to learn and to grow, and then to joyfully advocate for our kids in a collective way that carries more weight. You know, same thing with PATH. So if your spiritual organization is part of PATH, which almost all of them are in Howard County, you know, you can really be a part of those conversations, because it's not a one-time chit chat. It really is going to be a slow go. And as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be uncomfortable. We have centered the success. We have centered the voices that have been thriving. We have centered the voices that are often loudest and most powerful due to social and financial norms in this country, in this county. And so I think the biggest thing is to continue to step back and to center the voices of the people who are not thriving, and to really listen. Why aren't we, what are we not meeting? What needs are we not serving? And to really figure out why people are dropping out, or why our students in the English language learning program graduate at almost half the rate of the students who are not in that program. I mean, when we center their voices and we take the time to engage with them, they're going to tell us what they need. And so I think over time, you can't go wrong with really just listening and centering the voices of those that are often pushed off to the side, brushed under the rug, try to hide them because they don't represent what we think Howard County is. And I think that they're everything. I think they're everything. They're our best and our brightest. We just haven't figured out a way to help them shine enough.
You're here. David, final thoughts on how people can engage in educational equity over time?
Yeah, so there are many things one can do about both racist behavior by staff and racism and discrimination in general. The first, and perhaps most obvious thing to do, is to vote for anti-racist candidates in national, state, and local elections. Second, if you or someone you know is a high school student, encourage them to openly speak up when they witness discrimination. And last, let others, particularly those in a position of power, know that you are aware of the problems in the school system.
Thank you, David. And Tracy, final thoughts on how people can support educational equity over time?
Yes, I encourage everyone to learn all they can about equity and structural racism. Just to start off, learn all you can. Review the different policies that you are passionate about, and learn as much as you can about those. It's very important that you vote, as David said, and vote for leaders that you know support equity, not just those who are talking the talk, but those who actually walk the walk. Join organizations that are doing the work to support equity, like the African American Community Roundtable, Equity for HC, the Chinese School, or any organization that supports equity. Also, make sure that your voice is heard. Write letters to the school system or to legislators about what changes you want to see. And it's so important to advocate and support equity and racial equity and equity in income and wages. There's so many things that impact the way our students live. And so we all have to advocate for our children to have an equal education.
Thank you. A big, huge thank you to our panelists. Howard County Library System provides high quality education, and we want to ensure you have the information you need to take action in our community. Please take a moment to reflect. We're going to give you a minute to just think on these two questions, and then we'll open up the chat. We'll put a PowerPoint slide up with some upcoming events. The first is a takeaway from today's event, your biggest takeaway. And the second, is there any action that you are going to take as a result of what you've learned this evening or heard this evening? And again, we'll be following up by email. And we encourage you to share additional information on organizations and follow-up actions with Katie DeSalvo-Thronson. We'll be putting her email again in the chat. We'll give you just a moment or two to respond to those questions in the chat. Okay, and again, we'll be following up by email. We encourage you to share additional organizations and follow-up actions with Katie DeSalvo-Thronson. You'll see some upcoming classes and events there on that slide, and we invite you to join us for each of those events. The next one being tomorrow evening on the legacy of Elijah Cummings and the fight for our future of democracy. Please also participate in our post-event survey. We'll drop that link in the chat for you at this time. And thank you again to everyone, each of our panelists and presenters today. Thank you all of our participants for engaging. Take care and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you soon.
Tonya, this is Katie DeSalvo-Thronson. I'm happy to stay here and a few more moments in case people want to leave additional comments.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, thank you again, everyone, for attending tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much again to our panelists.